This is an article about why does good arise from evil and why people do charity. Symbolic trauma is the paradigm of evil. That is to say, I violate the rules of the symbolic system to achieve a kind of enjoyment. For example, people can obtain a sense of authenticity by violating moral laws. Everyone is so stupid. They don't know that the law is structured symbolically. The real world has no rules. At first, what he may pursue is a kind of enjoyment from the real, because the real thing he pursues is the taboo or prohibition of the system. What he desires is the object A, but the principle of desire always prevents him from approaching the object A. So he takes the violation of the system rules as his desire. So he also experiences a sense of pleasure in it. If a person kills someone to avenge his mother's murder, perhaps no one will think he is very evil. But if a person kills just for the sake of killing, that is truly evil in the real sense. However, it is precisely this kind of evil that opens up space for good, which is what is meant by good arising from evil. Evil can make people reflect on what good is, just as lasciviousness retroactively constructs innocence, the ultimate result of Germany's downfall, as a significant improvement in the global standards of morality, human rights, and justice among countries. Because evil can create an excess. That is, it can tear a hole, a trauma, in the symbolic system, and people will use good to cover up that trauma in order to make up for that hole. This is the reason why evil has ontological priority over good. This is why good arises from evil. But there is a perverse trap here. That is, some people will deliberately create evil to achieve good. For example, the purpose of his doing bad is precisely to overcome the evil. Another example, in the novel The Heroine, a governess deliberately set fire to the house and then risked her life to save the children in order to show her devotion to the family and thus won the praise of others. This is a perverse kind of good, which is hypocrisy. They just use good to obtain some positive symbols, so as to gain more benefits for themselves. The purpose of their actions is not good itself. Good is just their tool. For example, the charity work of some capitalists and celebrities is just a part of their business operations. They may not care about people in distress and have no sympathy. They just know that doing charity can make their own development better, continue to build a perfect image to capture people's eros, and thus achieve greater commercial value. That is to say, they spend a sum of money in order to get a larger sum of money. Is this really charity? Isn't this another form of exploitation? After they're built a good public image, they then consume the public's errors and then help capitalists endorse more advertisements. The public then buys the shitty products, and thus the public's money goes back into their pockets. In a society with strict moral standards, when it comes to celebrities, people not only look at their works, but also their moral character. Not only their moral character, but also the glorious side of human nature, such as goodness, should be seen in them. So, for celebrities, their motives for being good are always impure. If it is purely for the sake of being good, they will not publicize it. Their publicity gives the suspicion of continuing to do evil. They hope that good can bear fruit and they can get rewards from it. This is also a kind of good arising from evil. Or perhaps they may not be aiming for capital. That is to say, they may feel a sense of superiority by helping people in distress and satisfy their obsession with their self-image. So they hope that there are people in distress so that their goodness can be manifested. After all, this is a symbol praised by the system, especially for public figures. However, the reason why many people are poor is precisely that capitalists have squeezed their blood, precisely that they have occupied the huge wealth of society. This is called creating evil and then doing good themselves. They do charity just to better exploit the proletarians. They do charity just to make more money and then do more charity, rather than to liberate the proletarians. Their ultimate goal is not on the side of the proletarians. The development of a society is not balanced by charity. On the contrary, the greater the intensity of charity, the greater the disparity in wealth, and the charity is just a necessary structural reflux of the system. When looking at a person's charity work, we should see which side he stands on. They would rather do charity than raise the wages of their employees. But why don't they want to do this? Because raising wages for their employees cannot obtain the praise of good from the whole system. Charity is always free donation, at least on surface. If they just improve the treatment of their own employees, it is still within an employment relationship and is paid wages. This cannot be called charity and will not make people think of good. So they will choose to squeeze the employees first and then make free donations to obtain the title of good. They hope that there are people in trauma or distress so that their function of healing the trauma can be manifested. But in fact, there are sick motives behind it. This is most vividly embodied in the teacher's punishment of students. Some teachers claim or deceive themselves that they are punishing students under the guise of moral concern, but in fact, they are satisfying their own sadistic impulses. I hate you because I love you. This is the reason some parents hit their children. This is their evil, and they have the shelter of duty. I am a teacher or a parent. I have a duty to educate, to discipline children. So they punish children in order to fulfill their duty or their perverse desires. They long for imperfection in their eyes. They only want to see imperfection. There is a vulgar joke about Jesus. On the eve of Jesus being nailed to the cross, someone was worried because Jesus was still a virgin. So in order to leave the regrets, people arranged for a woman to enter Jesus' tent. But after a while, the woman ran out in horror because Jesus saw her private parts. He thought it was a wound and wanted to heal it. But if it were really healed, wouldn't that be a kind of harm? This joke tells us to beware of those who are overly enthusiastic about healing trauma. Their excessive goodness is precisely because of their excessive evil. Deep down in their hearts, they may be the people who hope for chaos in the world. Some psychological consulting nowadays is exactly like this group of people. They can't wait for modern people to have psychological problems so that they can save them. But their rescue can't be the rule. So those people may come back, which is also what they want. To some extent, they are the people who create psychological problems because the popularization of psychology makes people pay attention to the so-called inner dimension of people, thus limiting their vision to the I, and thus ignoring social problems. The more this happens, the more the problems of the I are piled on the I, and the more psychological problems will arise. Another point is that some people's psychological problems are a kind of lack from the other. The rise of this industry is not because a large number of people have psychological problems. On the contrary, it is the development of this industry that has given birth to people's psychological problems. At least it has played a certain negative role because there is the item of psychological counseling. They will also advertise and promote it to arouse people's desire for psychological counseling. So some people will create some psychological problems by themselves to cater to the desire of the other. This is following the fashion. This is the evil of psychological counseling. Of course, psychoanalysis itself also has a certain baseness because its maintenance is also based on people's pain. They also make a living by relying on people's pain. They are like prostitutes in that they are all to solve people's urgent requests. But to some extent, psychoanalysts are also noble because they bear the truth of the subject, face the pain of the subject directly, and reveal its true meaning. They want the subject to be completely well and face the person's truth sincerely. They are not for the benefit of the system. From this point of view, they are in confrontation with the whole system. In the final analysis, evil is fundamental. We all have it. Besides what I said before, that people always need to violate rules to obtain entertainment, it is also because the self itself is the essential frustration of its essence. The I itself is the biggest failure. Because the self is always based on an imaginary identification with its mirror image. The mirror image is both an opponent and a potential delusional persecutor. Only when the mirror image generates frustration can the self be constructed. In other words, only by overcoming obstacles can the self be realized. Only when someone is frustrated can the self feel superior. Only when someone is inferior to him can his value be manifested. So the self always hopes that its mirror image will be frustrated. So goodness is always impure. There is no absolutely pure goodness. Most people's goodness always carries a certain amount of evil or private pleasure. So we don't have to struggle whether some people are really charitable. What we should see is that extreme evil is not to realize the self by overcoming obstacles, but to take overcoming obstacles itself as the goal. This is the kind of evil I mentioned at the beginning. This is the kind of evil can indeed open up a space for good, but we should avoid falling into the perverse situation of good arising from evil. They may be the people who create evil. Especially, we should beware of those who are overly fond of healing trauma.